So let's take a look at what we need to cut for our Whisper crossbody. We need to cut 2 strap pieces. I have an outer in my vinyl here. I'm cutting mine at 140 centimeters or 55 inches. I'm only short, so that's long enough for me, and it's just the width of my vinyl. You may need to join if you want a longer strap, and I suggest joining at an angle so that you don't get the bulk of the seam in one spot. I will add a link to the tutorial on my blog so that you can see how I do that. We need a underside of that strap, and I'm using my bonded nylon, the same as I've used for my lining. We need to cut a zipper overlay. I've used my cutting machine to cut mine, so it does a nice neat job, and it cuts the window out automatically. Otherwise you can also cut that by hand. Flap, we need to cut 1 exterior and 1 lining piece. Now, depending on your vinyl, you may or may not want to add some extra interfacing or stabilizers on the back. Now, I've not specified in the pattern exactly which pieces or what stabilizers or interfacings to add to the pattern pieces, except where it's absolutely necessary you do, because vinyls and leathers and corks vary so much in their thickness. It's not easy to specify, unlike quilting cottons. So you're going to have to use some judgment there as to how much support you want to add. Whether you want a soft bag or a more structured bag, you may need to add something to the back of your vinyl should it be very soft. Now for my flap, I've just used my ultra heavy easy fuse on the back of this, and that's made it quite nicely supported. I have not added anything to the bonded nylon. I don't add anything to the bonded nylon anywhere. I have included stabilizer pieces without the seam allowance in the pattern, so it makes it easy and convenient for you to add stabilizer, because it's best if you keep it out of the seams, so that there will help. For the base, we need to cut 1 vinyl, 1 exterior and 1 Decaville heavy base support, a base stabilizer. Now I have fused a layer of my heavy interfacing behind that as well as the Decaville, just to make that nice and supportive. We need to cut some strap tabs. I've cut 2 exterior of those, and we need to cut 2 tab supports. This will just be where your D-ring will go, because we make it like this, and then your D-ring will go there, and that Decaville will make sure that that stays nice and supportive. It's very thin but very strong, so it's just centered in the middle up one end. And the exterior gussets. For my exterior gussets, because my vinyl is very soft and I want to have more support, I have added the interfacing that I use, the heavy interfacing, plus a layer of thin fleece. If I was using a waterproof canvas, I possibly wouldn't add anything, because that gives it so much extra structure, but bonded nylon's a bit softer, and I like to add a little bit of extra oomph to my pieces when I'm using the bonded nylon. So I've added my interfacing underneath there, and then it's a very lightweight fleece on top, and we have 2 tab supports, and they go centered left to right, 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters down from the top, 1 on each. For the exterior back body top, we need to cut 1 exterior, and in my case I've added 1 interfacing to the back of mine. I haven't added any fleece on these, only onto the gusset. The exterior back body bottom, you need to cut 1 exterior, and in my case I've cut 1 interfacing there. If you had a very soft vinyl, you might want to add a bit of fleece, or if you're using waterproof canvas, you may not need anything. For the front body, the exterior front body, we need to cut 1 exterior, but I've also used 1 layer of my heavy interfacing there, and I've fused a nice thread in there as well. But yep, that'll just give it that bit of extra oomph that I'm seeking. For the body lining, I'm using the bonded nylon, and that doesn't need any interfacing. I haven't put any on there. And I've just cut 2 of those. 2 lining gussets, again 2 bonded nylon without any interfacing. 2 phone pockets, 2 linings out of the bonded nylon, no interfacing, and 2 zipper pocket pieces out of the bonded nylon without any interfacing. So let's take a look at what we need hardware and notions wise for our Whisper crossbody. We're going to need a number 5 zipper. This is 8.5 inches long or 21.5 centimetres. It's number 5. We need a lock. This is for the flap version. We need a lock, a thumb lock. The measurements for that is in the pattern. 1 of those. We need 2 swivel hooks. They're 1 inch or 2.5 centimetre. That's the measurement of the strap that's going to fit in there. We need a 1 inch or 2.5 centimetre slider. We need 2 D-rings, 1 inch, 2.5 centimetres. We need a selection of rivets. I used both a 6mm and an 8mm stem length for my strap. That'll depend on the materials you choose to make your strap out of as to what length stem post you'll need. And if you want to add a label of some sort, you'll need that as well. So now we're going to work on our strap tabs, and with the Decaville already fused in place up one end, we need to grab a ruler, and we're going to draw a line down the centre of each tab. Like that. And run that down the centre. Peel that backing off, and what we're just going to do is fold these sides in and stick them down on that line. Like that. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch all the way around our strap tabs to secure that in place. So now I'm just going to stitch all the way around my strap tab with a stitch length of 3.5 and a seam width of 3mm 1/8 of an inch. So now on the wrong side of our strap tabs, we need to find the centre of the strap tab, which is 3 inches. Now we're going to measure 1.5 inches back from this middle line, and we're working on the side that has no Decaville. So work out which one that is. So that's the end where my Decaville is. That's the end where my Decaville is. So we're going 1.5 inches back from this line, or outwards from this line, towards the side that has no Decaville. Same on this side. Like that, 1.5 inches or 4 centimetres, and 1 inch out from the centre line in the other direction towards the Decaville. Like that. Now add some glue in between those 2 lines and in between this top stitching. Like that. Retrieve your 2 D-rings, put one up this end and fold this side in to meet that line, and add some clips to hold it, making sure those edges are aligned. and just fold the other end in to meet in the middle there, and line up those edges and add some clips to hold. Same on this one. Remember the hook goes, the D-ring goes on the end where the decaville is. Like that, so we can set that aside to dry. Retrieving our strap pieces, now what we need to do is draw a line down the centre of each piece. So grabbing a ruler, and I'll just do that. This is on the wrong side. Like that. So now all we're going to do is grabbing some double-sided tape. I'm going to run some tape either side of the line because this is a springy kind of faux leather and doesn't like to stay folded, and I want to make sure it does. Like that. No, I don't pull all the tape off at once, I just do a piece at a time. But you can also add some clips if you don't think that's going to hold. So now we just need to repeat the process for our bonded nylon. Like that. So once you have both pieces like that, and if you find that your double-sided tape doesn't want to hold it, you can use clips or glue it, or you could even run some decorative stitches down the middle, one either side of the fold, just even a plain stitch, just a bit extra stitching. So now I'm just going to add a strip down the middle of this bonded nylon just to help it hold onto my faux leather strip. And now I'm just going to place my two pieces together, and I'm going to add some clips just to make sure that stays put. Now if they're not quite even, trim to suit. You can even add strap ends to those if you wanted to. So now that we have done that, we're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch all the way around that strap. So now I'm just going to stitch, top stitch all the way around my strap, 3mm 1/8 of an inch from the edge, using a stitch length of 3.4. And there we have our strap. So now that I have stitched my strap, I need to grab my slider with the wrong side facing up. I'm just going to put this strap through with the underside facing upwards and pop it through, pull it through about 4 centimetres, 1.5 inches, but that's really up to you, it doesn't really matter. Now I'm going to add a rivet to mine, but you can stitch a rectangular box with an X through it if you prefer, or both even. Like so. Now grabbing the other end of the strap, we're going to take that through a hook, and we're going to make it so the hook's facing outwards from your strap. So on the faux leather side, it needs to face out like so, and then go back through the slider. Pull it through, and grabbing the other hook, going to place that on there. Fold that over so the hook's outward from the faux leather side. Pull it through about 4 centimetres, 1.5 inches, and I'm going to add 2 rivets this time. Now if you feel your edges are fraying, or if you use fabric, you may want to fold that under and stitch it if your machine is capable of it. Or if you have raw edges and you don't want the raw edges that frays fabric or whatever, you could also add a strap end to that, so that would hide those edges. You can also finish those ends with some edge coat. Like that. And there we have one adjustable strap. We can put that aside while we make the rest of the bag. So now retrieving your strap tabs, we'll just take the clips off, and your gussets. Now onto the wrong side of these strap tabs, I'm going to add some glue, and I'm going to position them 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres down from the top, centered left to right. I'm using glue because I find that it just holds that much better, and I just want that extra strength, but some people use double-sided tape, and that's fine if you want to use double-sided tape, because the rivets will do its job to hold it in place. I just prefer to have the extra security of the glue. So I've put the glue on the back there, and I'm going to centre that. I'm eyeballing it, but I could measure it as well. Like so. And same for the other side. 1 inch down from the top. Like that. And now I'm actually going to use that to put some weight on here and let that dry. Put some weight and go away and have a cup of tea. So my glue has dried now, so we're going to take that out of the way, and we're going to go over to the sewing machine, and we're going to top stitch as close as we can to the D-rings. Close as I can get to the hardware. Stitch length is 3.5, like that. Do the same for the other one. I always start in the middle because I find it just helps with the layers that they don't shift. Like that. So now that I've top stitched across those D-rings there, I'm going to measure the positions where I'm going to set my rivets. I'm going to put 3 rivets in each side, 2 centimetres or 3/4 of an inch apart. Just get those dots marked there, like that. Just grabbing my hand press, I have two, one for my hole punch, and so I'm just going to punch these holes here. And the second one. And now I'm going to add the rivets onto there. And with my other press, I shall set them. And the second one. And we're done. We're going to work on the base and add it to our gusset pieces. So put them right sides together and clip to hold. If you want to add bag feet, now's the time to do it. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch each side. Okay, so now we're going to stitch our base. 1 centimetre seam allowance, stitch length of 2.4. Other end. Now what we need to do is finger press that seam towards the base, and we're just going to top stitch 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch from the seam on the base side. Stitch length 3.0. And so on the other side. Like that. So there we have our gusset assembly now with our base in place. So now we're just going to pop that aside. So now we're just grabbing our phone pocket pieces, our exterior back body top piece and our exterior back body bottom. Now what we need to do is grab a pen and we're going to mark the center bottom of the exterior back body top piece. I just like to fold my piece of paper in half to make it easy to find the center. Folding my body panel pattern piece in half, press a crease, and now I'm going to mark the top. I'll do it on both sides. Set them aside and do the phone pocket pieces. Now these lining pieces are nice and soft, so I'm just going to fold them in half and mark the center tops. Like that. So now we need to just grab a phone pocket piece and we're going to put this right sides together and line up those center marks and add some clips to hold. And the same with this piece, making sure we're putting it on the bottom edge, lining up those center marks and clip to hold. So now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch these seams. Okay, stitching these with a 6 millimeter 1/4 of an inch seam, and my stitch length is 2.4. Like that, and the other piece, the exterior back body bottom. Like that. So now that we have stitched those seams, we need to press or finger press our fabric away from our exterior pieces. And then we just grab them and put them right sides together. Add some clips to hold in place. Just make sure all these edges are lining up together properly. So now we need to just grab a pen and we're going to measure 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch back from the edge of the phone pocket pieces. And just draw a line. Do that on both sides. So now what we need to do is stitch from the top there to the mark and back tack at each side to secure that in place, and then go over to the second side and do the same thing, back tack at each end to secure it. And we might just add a couple of clips into the pocket pieces here to stop them from falling down under your work and getting stitched into the wrong place. Okay, so now we're going to stitch this seam 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch from the edge and a stitch length of 2.4. Just make sure this pocket's out of the road. So now that we've done that, we need to get rid of these clips and just open this up so that we can open the pocket pieces and press this seam apart. Now what I like to do is add some double-sided tape. So just press that, and there should be about 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters of vinyl that you can see under there when you've pressed that apart. Just stick that down thoroughly like that, and just stick some clips in to hold while we go and do some top stitching. Now what we're going to do is we're going to top stitch along this bottom edge of that seam, not the top, just the bottom. Do not stitch the top side. Okay, so now we are top stitching the lower seam only, not the top side, making sure your foam pocket is kept well out of the way, and we're stitching approximately 3 millimeters 1/8 of an inch from the seam using a stitch length of 3.5. Like that. So now that we've done that, we just need to remove these clips, smooth our pocket pieces down, add some clips to hold, and now what we're going to do is we're going to top stitch down the top side of the seam this time, and just make sure that your pocket piece is clipped up so it's out of the way and doesn't end up in your stitching. So now I'm going to stitch the second side of that seam, 3 millimeters 1/8 of an inch from the seam, stitch length of 3.5. Like that. So now what we need to do is we're going to fold our pieces right sides together at the phone pocket opening, and just smooth out this pocket piece and just make sure it's going to lay nice and flat and in the right place. Now we're just going to clip these two side edges together like that. Now with that all smoothed out, we're going to stitch down there, across the bottom and back up the other side. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch my pocket seam, 3/8 of an inch, 1 centimetre seam allowance. I'm trying to get as close as I can without actually stitching into that faux leather there. Like that. So now that we've done that, just get rid of these clips and smooth that out. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to mark where the opening starts or ends at each side, at the very exact spot. Put some marks there, and what we're going to do is we're going to go over the sewing machine and stitch between the two rows of top stitching, and then I'm going to add a rivet just below those top stitchings right underneath there. Okay, so now I'm just going to add some stitches between my 2 rows of top stitching, just to reinforce this end of the opening of the pocket. Same on the other side, making sure the pocket's down out of the road. So now I'm going to add my rivets directly below my top stitching. So I need to punch some holes. Just making sure that I'm not punching through any threads. Set my rivets. Now set that aside. Now we'll set this aside and we'll get our flap pieces. My flap pieces. Now if yours are a bit stiff and not flexible like mine, you may want to leave your gap at the side, but mine are so soft I'm going to put mine at the top, the opening, so that if I do some wonky stitches it's not so visible, being at the back of the bag. So I'm just going to run some double-sided tape along the 2 edges so I can fold my seam allowances under. And just press them to hold, and I'll just line these up so that I can get them nice and even. Make sure that they match up. So now we'll just add some clips around the flap, make sure that that stays put. So now we need to stitch all the way around our long edge of this flap and leave the top end open. Okay, so now I'm just going to stitch with a 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch seam. Take your time around the curve. Now that we have done that, we need to check the fit of our lock. So I need to push these seams open like that and then just check that that groove fits over that fabric and see if it's loose like mine is. Then I need to add a little bit of Decaville Heavy to pad that up. So I'm just going to measure to find where the center of my flap's going to be so that I can position the Decaville correctly. So I'm just going to glue that on. You can fuse it if you want to. I'm just going to put it just below the seam line and stick that down there. And I'm going to double check that I now have the right thickness and that that's nice and snug. Yep. Okay, so now I just want to stick this down. Just going to put a weight on it and let that dry. So now that my glue has dried, just take that away and I'll go grab my pinking shears and I'm going to trim around these curves. You can just notch your curves if you don't have pinking shears. Now I'm going to turn my flap right side out. It's a little bit of a workout here. Poke out those edges, smooth it all out. Now I'm going to go over and hammer all around the edges just to help that sit nicer. Now that I have hammered that and now I've got a nice smooth edge, I'm going to measure 4 centimeters down or 1.5 inches. And I need to mark that, and rather than use a pen that might leave a mark, I'm going to use washi tape. Stick that down. I'm just going to add some arrows on there as well, just so I know or remember which direction or which side of that washi tape I need to stitch. Just clip that to make it stay in place. Now I'm going to top stitch all the way around this long edge from the top of the washi tape there, from one end to the other, and I'm leaving that top end unstitched. So I'm going to start level with that washi tape on the top side because I've got my arrows pointing up. My stitch length is 3.5. I'm stitching 3mm 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Stopping level with that top stitching line, or that mark that I've made there, the washi tape, like that. So now that we have done that, we need to clip this phone pocket up out of the way so it doesn't get in the road and caught in our stitching. Now we need to work out the position of our flap. So this top edge that we previously marked needs to be 6mm 1/4 of an inch down from the top stitching on the lower side of the pocket opening. And just make sure you get that centered left to right. Just clip that to hold, and then use some washi tape to mark the position. Take these clips off and the flap away, and what we need to do is run some double-sided tape around that top area of the flap which has no top stitching. Take the double-sided tape off and stick it down in place between those marks that you've made before. Grab some clips to clip it on, like that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go and top stitch all along 6mm 1/4 of an inch down from the top stitching below the pocket and around these three edges. And you can stitch a second row 6mm 1/4 of an inch below the first if you like. That's optional, but I like to give it a bit of extra strength. Just make sure that you're not catching your phone pocket underneath, so just double check, have a look that you're not going to catch that, and adjust your stitching if necessary. Okay, so now I'm going to attach my flap to my bag, stitching just below that line there, so it's away from my pocket, not catching that underneath. Stitch length is 3.5. Stitching around this bottom edge of the flap. Back up to meet the previous stitching, and I'm just going to stitch another one about 6mm 1/4 of an inch down from the first row, just to make sure that flap's nice and secure. Okay, so now that we have done that, we can just remove this washi tape. I think I stitched it under there a bit. Take off the clips. And there you can see I didn't stitch my pocket into it. So now we have to grab our thumb lock and make sure we get it orientated right. So it's got to go like this. We put it on there and make sure that it's up the right way, so that when we put it onto our bag we've got it not upside down. So it goes like that. And just double checking that that fits all right. If it's still a little bit loose, you might want to add a bit of extra packing. Now I'm going to add some glue. Normally I would use a Gutermann or E6000 glue, but I don't have any right now. So this will do. I don't know how good it'll work, but I'll give it a go. Now I'm just going to grab my paper pattern piece, fold that in half, just to find the center, and I'm just going to use that as a guide to make sure I get my lock centered properly. So eyeballing that, push that on. Now I'm just going to check that looks all right and grab my screws, little tiny fellas, get an awl and poke a hole. That just makes it easier to screw the screw in. Can add some Loctite to this or nail varnish or something to stop the little screw from ever falling out. So now that we've done that and it all looks good, we'll set it aside. So now we'll just grab our exterior front body and the backing plate, and we're going to use this to mark the location. We'll just mark where we're going to put it on the back of the exterior front body, and we're going to put it 9 centimeters, 3.5 inches down from the center top raw edge. I've just folded my paper pattern piece in half, and I'm using that to mark where my center is. Use the backing plate to find out exactly where I'm going to put the holes. So I'll just line that up and mark those. Now using the stitch rip, I'm ripping my little holes for the prongs. I'm just going to make sure that I get this round the right way for my thumb lock. I don't want to install this piece upside down and find out when I go to close my bag later. So I just use that to make sure I get it right and poke that through those holes. It's a bit tight, so I need to make that a little bit bigger. So I'm just going to add a scrap of Decaville to the back to give that lock some extra support. I'm using Decaville Heavy. I'll just mark the prong spots in here. I'm just using my stitch rip to get those holes cut and put that over the prongs and the backing plate on. So now I'm going to go over to the hammer and I'm going to hammer them inwards. Some people like to bend them outwards, but I find that that pokes a hole in my work, so I prefer to bend them inwards, but that's personal preference. So now that I have my prongs all bent, I'm going to put something in the back. This is just duct tape, and I'm going to put that over the prongs to protect my bag from wear, protect the lining. You can use scraps of interfacing if you prefer. I've installed a label there as well. That's up to you if you do that. So now we need to just retrieve some pattern pieces, and I've folded this in half. This is my body exterior piece. I just want to mark the bottom edge down the bottom here. I'll mark it on both sides to make it easier. And grab the back piece too. We'll do the same here. Mark down the bottom on both sides. And grab our gusset assembly, and we're going to mark the center of the base on both side edges and on both sides of the base piece. Now set the back piece aside. So now we're just going to place these right sides together, and we're going to line up those marks and add some clips. Now just line up these top ends of the body and the gussets, get them even, and add some clips to hold. We'll just work our way from the top in towards the curve. Now just swing that around, and we'll do the other top ends of the body and gussets and clip those in place. Add a few more on this side and a few down the bottom. And now at the curve, we're just going to snip in approximately 6mm, 1/4 of an inch snips into the gusset. That'll just help it to lay a bit better. Now I just squish all that down, And we're going to add some clips and just work your fingers around there to get that all smoothed out. And now we're going to do the other side and repeat the process to clip into your seam allowance and squish it down and clip in place. And now we have all that clipped, we're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch all the way around that seam. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch my seam. I'm going to use a stitch length of 2.4, 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now once I've stitched that, I like to inspect my seams to make sure I haven't gone wonky anywhere and need to round that off or something. And now I'm going to trim them back with my pinking shears, but you can just notch your curves if you haven't got pinking shears. Just around both of these curves. And now these rest of the seams, I'm trimming them back to 6 millimeters, 1/4 of an inch. And along the base as well. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch another row of stitching right next to the first row of stitching, but not on it, all the way around. So now that we have done that, we need to repeat the process, and I'm just going to clip this flap and phone pocket up out of the way so it doesn't get caught in my stitching, and just clip everything like before. Snip into the gussets at the curves. And there we have it. Now we're going to go over the sewing machine and stitch all the way around that seam. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch my second seam. 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch seam. Stitch length of 2.4. So now I'm just going to do some trimming, and I'm going to stitch the seam again right next to the first stitching. So I'll just remove these clips, and now I'm going to turn the bag right sides out. Push all these seams out. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over and hammer all these seams all right round the edge. That'll just help it sit better, particularly down here at the base. I want to make sure that that sits nice and crisp. So now I've grabbed my lining body pieces and my zipper overlay piece, and you need to make sure you've cut your window out of your overlay, and we're just going to put one of these lining bodies aside because we only need the one. So on the back of that we're just going to add some double-sided tape. So we need to place the overlay onto the lining body, centering left to right, 6 centimeters or 2 3/8 of an inch down from the top. Just peel the backing off and center that and press it in place. And now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch all around the outer edge. Okay, so now I'm going to top stitch all the way around my zipper overlay window. I'm going to use a stitch length of 3.5, and you can either tie the threads off at the back here, or if you are like me and you're not that keen, you can just back tack a couple of stitches to secure your threads. That's it. Take your time around the curve. So now we need to cut our zipper pocket window opening here. Either use a rotary cutter or scissors like I just did. And we're going to trim the fabric at the back, being careful not to cut your faux leather or vinyl or whatever. And just trim this back so it's 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters back from the opening. It doesn't need to be neat because you don't see it. And now we're just going to run some double-sided tape along the edge of the opening, just on the long edges. Now grabbing your zipper and your zipper pocket fabric, we're just going to put the double-sided tape along the top edge of each of those. And now grabbing your zipper, we're going to place that wrong sides down with the right side of your zipper up onto the right side of the fabric. And now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch. Okay, I'm going to stitch my zipper on using a 6mm 1/4 of an inch seam, stitch length 2.4. So now we need to press the fabric away from the zipper, just finger press that. And we're going to place the zipper wrong side down with the right sides of the fabric together and stitch that seam. Okay, stitching using a 6mm 1/4 of an inch seam. Like that. So now all we need to do is finger press our fabric away from the zipper, flip that over and put the pull on the side that you want your zipper to open from. Peel off the backing tape, center the window over the zipper and get that all even. And when you're happy with that, we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch all the way around that window. We're going to back tack at each end just to secure that in place. So now I'm going to stitch around my pocket window, 3mm 1/8 of an inch from the edge and a stitch length of 3.5, and I'm going to back tack at each end of the window. So now that we have stitched around our pocket window, we need to smooth our fabric out, and we're just going to put some clips in at the side to hold, and I went a bit wonky up the top there, don't know why, never mind. And we're just going to trim off this bottom edge. So now grabbing some double-sided tape, we're just going to run that along the bottom edges of our pockets so that we can fold the seam allowance under and that will hold it. Do the same for both pieces. We're not going to close the bottom of the pocket, we're going to leave that open for turning. So now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch the sides of our pocket. Okay, so now I'm folding back my lining body panel and exposing my pocket and stitching at a 1cm 3/8 of an inch seam. Just readjust your fabric if you need to. And just And now to the other side. And we have left the bottom open. That's what we're going to close our lining through. So with that left open, we're going to retrieve the other lining body panel, and if you want to add a slip pocket onto there, you can do that. I'm not adding one. If you want to add one, you can. If you're not sure how to, I have a video on YouTube which shows you how to make a simple slip pocket with a trim on top, which I'll link to in the pattern, and I've also got some placement suggestions in the pattern. So retrieving your two lining gusset pieces and some clips, we're just going to place those right sides together and clip the longest of the two short ends, and then we're going to take it over to the sewing machine and stitch that seam. Okay, so now we're just going to stitch this lining seam, gusset seam, with a 2.4 stitch length and 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now what we'll do is we're going to finger press that seam just in one direction, doesn't matter which direction, it's just going to make it more stronger, and we're going to stitch 3 millimeters 1/8 of an inch from that seam line, top stitch length of 3.5, like that. Now that we have completed our zipper pocket, and if you want to add a slip pocket, you've done that. So we're just going to mark the bottom of our body panels, and I'm just going to use my pattern piece again, fold it in half just to find the center, and do that on both panels. And I'm just going to clip this pocket up out of the way. So now I'm going to work with the piece that has my zipper pocket attached. Just grab your gusset assembly, and placing these right sides together, I'm going to line up this gusset seam with the mark I made at the bottom and clip that in place. And then I'm going to line up the two top edges on both sides and clip those in place. Continue clipping, working your way from the top in towards the corners, and then snip into your gusset seams and squish that out and clip to hold. And do that on the other side. Just work your way towards the corner on that side and then clip into your gusset seam and squish that out and clip into place. And now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch all the way around that seam. Okay, so now I'm just going to stitch my body lining, making sure that zipper pocket's out of the way, using a 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch seam. Stitch length of 2.4. Like that. So now that we have done that, we need to do some seam clipping. I'm going to cut my corners with a pinking shear. You can notch it if you prefer, and trim these other seams down to 6 millimeters 1/4 of an inch. Now grabbing the other body panel piece, we're going to put these right sides together with the other one, and we're going to be leaving an 18 centimeter 7-inch gap this time. that will be for turning. So I'm just going to mark that. And hopefully with those marks there, I will remember to actually not stitch in between them. So now I'm going to match up the mark with the center seam in the gusset down there, and I'm just going to clip it temporarily just so that it just holds everything. I can get everything even. Going to match up the top edges and then just continue on in the same manner, clipping everything together like we did before, except for your gap, of course. So with all of that clipped together, now it's time to go over to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch the two sides, leaving the gap in the middle open. Now do not stitch this section closed, as we need to use that for turning, so leave that open. Okay, so now we're going to stitch the second side. 1 centimetre through 1/8 of an inch seam, normal regular stitch length of 2.4. Whoops, now I went too far. I'm only meant to go to the line, so I'm just going to go back a bit, and I'm just going to back tack there to secure that off, and just undo this little bit that I went too far. There. Now go over across to the other side to my other red line. Like that. So now I'm just going to do some trimming. Now that that's all been stitched and trimmed, and we've left our opening on the bottom, we need to mark the center tops of our body lining panels. So I'm just going to snip those, just a tiny snip to mark the centers, and I'm just going to do the same with my exterior body assembly. Now that I've marked all that, what we need to do is we're going to grab our exterior and we're going to put it down inside the lining. Now decide which side you want your zipper pocket on. I'm going to put mine at the back of the bag near the phone pocket, but that's up to you where you put it. Now we're just going to slip that down in there. Now it just takes a little bit of maneuvering of this around so that we can get our top edges even. And just make sure the flap and the hardware is all pushed down into the bag. And clip everything together. And same on the other side gusset. Make sure them seams are even, match up your center marks, and just clip your bag all the way around the top. And now once we've got that all clipped, we can go over to the sewing machine and we can stitch all the way around the top of our bag. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch all the way around the top of my bag using a 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch seam, stitch length of 2.4. There, we've stitched all the way around the top of our bag. So now that that's all done, what we need to do is pull this exterior out of this bottom hole in the lining. Just pull the lining up over the bag, and now we can push that lining down inside the bag. And while we've got our hand down there, we can just push everything out. And at the top, what we need to do is roll the seams so that seam lays directly at the top of the bag. And what I like to do is I like to go and hammer all the way around, especially here at these thick side gusset seams. But hammering it all the way around helps for the seam to lay flat in the right spot. So I'll just go and do that. And now that I've hammered my seams all the way around, I'm going to clip everything in place, making sure that top seam stays directly at the top. So now that we have that all clipped all the way around, we can go over to the sewing machine and we can stitch all the way around the top of the bag. Okay, so now I'm going to top stitch around the top of my bag using a 1/4 inch 6mm seam, and my stitch length is 3.5. And there we have it. We've stitched all the way around the top of our bag. So now that that's all done, we need to open up our zipper pocket, put our hand down in there, and you can give everything a good push and shove out while your hand's down in there. Make sure everything's pushed out like it should be, and just grab that lining, pull it out. And now we're going to line up those bottom edges and add some clips. And now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch the seam. Okay, so now I'm just going to stitch the bottom of my lining closed using a seam of 1 cm 3/8 of an inch, stitch length 2.4. So now we're just pushing that all back down in place, and what we need to do now is pull out our phone pocket, and I'm just going to clip the corners to reduce some of that bulk. So I'll just snip that off, and same on the other side, and just line up these seams, push out that side there, make sure that's sitting good, and clip in place. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch that seam. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch my pocket closed. I stitch pretty close to the edge of the pocket, trying to keep the edges aligned. Top stitching 3.5. Like that. And just make sure you double check your pocket is actually closed and there's no where you've ran off and you've got a hole there, and I don't, so I'm all good. So now that we have done that, we can put our pocket back down into the bag and push those seams and corners out. Get that sitting nice. If it's too bulky, you can give them a whack with a hammer. And there we have a nice, neat fitting lining. Oh yes. So now we can grab our adjustable strap and clip that on. Like that. Woohoo! We now have a finished bag. Lots of space, roomy. Yes.